Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and this is a starter guide for Final Fantasy XIV Online. Why? Well, because I know a bunch of people who started the game and subsequently been very confused and quit as they had no idea what was going on. Me, I think it's a good game and I'd like to see more people get into it. I think it's a shame that people have trouble getting into it, but I understand why, because it can be a lot to cope with. So I thought I'd make a guide that will hopefully help out newcomers. And of course, if you have any questions not covered in the video, feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll get back to you ASAP. That out of the way, well, let's get started. And of course, what with 14 being an MMO, before you actually make your character and get into the game, you'll need an account subscription. The game is available on PC, Steam and PS4 at the moment. It's also worth pointing out that Steam and PC clients are actually different. Same with PS4. If you buy the game on PC, you won't be able to log in on PS4 unless you buy the game again. It's a little stupid, but oh well. There is a free trial for the game which I believe goes up to around level 30, so I definitely suggest starting with that. And if you have a friend who currently plays, ask them about the Recruit a Friend, the Refer a Friend system, as you'll both benefit from that. I can also hit you up with one of those if you like. But once you've got your account set up, you should get a one-time password set up too. This is basically a password that changes every time you log in, and it's done via an app on your phone. It also unlocks a free teleport in-game, which is very handy. But account shenanigans out of the way, and once you're in-game, you'll have to, of course, make a character, and this is where we'll kick things off properly. There are several races in 14, but these will only determine your character's physical appearance. Every race and gender option can be every class, you won't be locked out of anything. There is an extremely small variation in stats between the races, but it is so minute that even the most extreme min-maxers are like to ignore it. That said, the races are as follows: humans, who are called Hyur or something, Elvan, elves, Mikote, cats, Rogaden, Lalafell and Aura, lizards. And each race is split into two clans or tribes. For example, here are split into Midlander and Highlander, and these are the only ones who actually have different models and animations. Midlanders and Highlanders look different. For all the others, it's just palette swaps. Different colours, different stats. The Aura, or however you pronounce it, are a feature of the first expansion, Heavensward, so it's possible you won't have access to them depending on the version of the game you buy. And keep in mind, whilst you certainly can make alts, 14 is a game that seems more designed around a singular character. That is to say, you can play every class on the same character, swapping between them, so it's worth taking that into consideration when choosing your character. You might want to pick a race that would suit various different roles aesthetically. Once that's done, you'll be picking your starting class. 14's classes are split between 3 roles: tanks, healers and DPS. Additionally, DPS is split between ranged DPS, melee DPS and magic DPS. That is the simple way of looking at it. The game also categorizes the classes as Disciples of War, physical damage, and Disciples of Magic, magical damage, along with Disciples of the Hand, crafting, and Disciples of the Land, gathering, but you don't need to worry about the crafting stuff starting out. The initial classes in 14 are Gladiator, Pugilist, Marauder, Lancer, Archer, Conjurer, Thaumaturge, and Machinist. And although you cannot start as one, upon reaching level 10 you will unlock another class, Rogue. So at this point you might be thinking, this is Final Fantasy, where is my Black Mage? Where is my Dragoon? Where's my White Mage? Well, these are what you would call jobs, a sort of evolution of classes. Basically, classes become jobs at level 30. Now in the past you had to level more than one class before you could attain your job of choice. For example, if you wanted to be a paladin, you would need a gladiator at level 30 and a conjurer at level 15. Good news is they've scrapped that, making the whole process a lot more streamlined and simple. The list of jobs is as follows: Gladiator becomes Paladin, Pugilist becomes Monk, Marauder becomes Warrior, Lancer becomes Dragoon, Archer becomes Bard, Conjurer becomes White Mage, Thaumaturge becomes Black Mage, and Machinist can either become Scholar or Summoner. In addition to this, Heaven's Ward unlocks 3 additional jobs that have no associated classes. In essence, they start at level 30, they start as jobs. Dark Knight, Astrologian, and Machinist. And Stormblood unlocks Samurai and Red Mage, which start at level 50. These expansion jobs cannot be selected from the start, however. You'll have to reach higher level, a little bit like the Rogue, before you can unlock them. So let's have a brief look at each job, although you probably have an idea of which you're planning on starting with. A tanking class, Gladiator Paladin is the easiest to start with as it's extremely simple, albeit boring, to play at lower levels with a very basic rotation. The class uses sword and shield, and is your very traditional tank, with lots of defensive cooldowns and later on more holy magic themed abilities to supplement their paladin role. It is my preferred tank of choice as I like paladins. It's also worth noting that when Stormblood launched, they went from the least desirable tank to the most desirable tank. Although like everything in an MMO, this is subject to change with balance patches. It is also worth noting that tanking is almost always in demand, meaning you will get various bonuses and shorter queue times when you're going into a dungeon, for example. Overall, I think this is a great beginner choice for a tank, however keep in mind that tanking is a crucial role in group content. People will expect you to know what you're doing, and in many cases you will be the de facto leader of the group, initiating encounters and so forth. It might be worth considering DPS or healer when you're going through group content for the first time, so that you can learn it. An unarmed fist fighter class, the Pugilist monk is melee DPS. This means your job is to bring down the enemies that the tank is keeping occupied. This one is the most mobile of the bunch. You'll be changing position during combat frequently, as many of your abilities will do more damage or have bonus effects from either the flank or the rear of your enemy. Now personally I would say it's one of the less beginner friendly options because there is a lot of movement required, but at the same time it is good practice as mobility is very important later on in the game. The Marauder Warrior is our second tank choice. They used to be the king tanks for a long stretch of time due to extremely high health and relatively high damage for a tank. Using a two-handed axe, you might be mistaken for thinking they're a DPS class, but don't be fooled. This class is a tank, and in group content you will be tanking as this class most of the time. It's a little more involved than the Gladiator Paladin, which can make it more interesting if a little harder to play. It's definitely a solid choice though. You could think of Paladin as the defense-oriented tank, whereas Warrior is more of an offensive tank. As a lover of spears, the Lancer Dragoon is my favourite class. Unfortunately, it is also one with a bit of a stigma associated with it. The infamous floor tanking LOL-DRG. As a melee DPS, this functions fairly similar to Monk, although with the less positionals. The Dragoon's trademark ability, jumps, are both what make the class unique and will also be the cause of most of your deaths. Let's get it out of the way. The jump attacks in 14 are not an actual jump, there is no verticality to them, meaning you cannot use them in ways you might expect. The jump portion of abilities is nothing more than an animation, and one that you are locked into, often causing you to take damage that you probably wouldn't otherwise. That said, I would say it's somewhat easier than Monk for a new player. Whilst Dragoons use heavier armour than other DPS classes, that doesn't mean you'll be doing any off-tanking. This class brings great versatility to a group though, able to enhance the entire team's DPS. Plus, you know, Dragoons are just cool. I imagine this one is very self-explanatory. Archer Bard is our first ranged DPS class, but they are still physical damage. Using a bow and later on a bow harp, they are the closest you can get to a support or utility class amongst the initial choices. You'll have various songs that can boost the group. But keep in mind, this is still a DPS job. It's extremely simple, and I would say it's the easiest or simplest job to start with of all of them, as you don't need to worry about positionals. You'll be far enough away from enemies that you don't need to worry about most damage types either. Plus you don't have any cast times for the most part, so you can move and attack at the same time. This is one of those classes that is very easy to play badly, but rather hard to play well. But it's definitely a great choice to start out with, in my opinion. The Conjurer White Mage is our first healer, but don't let the name fool you. Healer doesn't mean your job is to stand there waiting for someone to get a boo-boo so you can patch it up. Healers have damage abilities in 14, and they exist for a reason. They aren't just for solo content. If you are standing there in group content, waiting for someone to get hurt, you're playing your class wrong. Your job as a healer is primarily to keep your team alive, but also to aid in damage. You will get damage over time spells that are usually instant cast. Make sure to stick these on enemies to aid in DPS. Conjurer White Mage is also the most basic healer, in that you heal in the most traditional sense. You are a reactive healer. The tank takes damage, you heal him. If you want to give healing a go, White Mage, like Paladin is for tanking, is the most simple way to start it. I should also point out, Conjurers get a unicorn mount at level 30. Perhaps the most famous Final Fantasy job, the Black Mage. What is your purpose with this job? Well, explode everything you see. Think of yourself as a cannon. You plant yourself down in a spot and then nuke everything until it's no longer breathing or moving. Using elemental magic, this is well, not surprisingly, our first magic-based DPS. Unfortunately, it's very hard for me to suggest Black Mage at this point in time, because they're not in a good spot right now. Why is that? Well, let me explain. At higher levels of content, mobility is key in this game. There will be so many area of effect abilities going on that you simply won't have much time to stand still and start casting your magic. That isn't to say Black Mage is unplayable or bad or anything, they just aren't in a great spot. That said, if you like the idea of high AoE damage, lots of explosions, if that tickles your fancy, this is the class for you. I think it's a fairly good choice for a beginner. The Arcanist Summoner is an interesting one. You will start as Arcanist, and then at level 30 you will branch out into Summoner, which, like Arcanist, is magic DPS, or Scholar, which is a healer. But we'll cover the DPS side of things first. What distinguishes the Summoner from the Black Mage? Well, the clue is in the name. The Summoner is able to draw on the power of other creatures to aid them in combat, and has many damage over time abilities, more so than the Black Mage. If I'm being honest though, I think Summoner gets much cooler abilities than the Black Mage, such as Death Flare and Summoning Bahamut. A very basic way to look at it would be to compare them with World of Warcraft's Mage and Warlock. Black Mage is like Mage, Summoner is kind of like Warlock. Another that branches from Arcanist. Remember when I said White Mage was a reactive healer? Scholar is more of a preventative healer, that is to say, you stop damage before it ever occurs. To this end you have various shield abilities. For example, you can cast a spell on a party member that will automatically heal them when their health is reduced to less than 50%. You also have a pet fairy that will aid you in healing. A little more complicated than White Mage, but I do think Scholar will help you learn more of the game, as preventing damage in the first place is always better, if you ask me. Upon reaching level 10 with your first class, you'll be able to swap to other classes in 14, and you'll have access to the quest that unlocks the Rogue. That quest is in Limsa Lominsa, one of the starting cities, so if Rogue is your thing, you will probably want to choose a class that starts in that city. which we'll talk about once we're done covering the remaining classes. The Rogue Ninja though, well, I think it's self-explanatory. Using twin daggers or short swords, this class is melee DPS with lots of great utility. It has a few positionals but not too many. Later on you will obtain mudras or jutsus. Think of them as hand symbols. You combine them in different ways to get different attacks. Whilst it's a little complicated, I would say Ninja is currently the best melee DPS, but do keep in mind that the classes are relatively well balanced in this game. For the most part, nobody's going to sigh if you bring this class or that class, because for the most part you can do all content with any and every class. But the Ninja brings very high DPS and great utility as well, so if stealthy poison blades are your thing, or if you like Naruto, it's a no-brainer. Now we'll touch on the Heaven's Ward jobs, starting with Dark Knight. Keep in mind, not only do you require Heaven's Ward for this job, you'll also need to have access to Heaven's Ward content in the story, so if you're starting out, it's going to be a long time before you can reach this. That said, Dark Knight is another tank, this time using a huge two-handed greatsword. As with Paladin and Warrior, your job is to make sure that every enemy in the room is hitting you. Dark Knights also involve managing their MP, and enhancing various abilities using another mechanic. I suppose you could think of them as a bit of a mix between Paladin and Warrior. I'm not that keen on Dark Knights myself, but they do have very fun class quests. Astrologian is another healer, this time combining traits of the White Mage and Scholar, being somewhere in the middle. This is about as close as you're going to get to Time Mages. Their unique draw to the class is that you'll be drawing cards from your deck that you can then use to grant yourself and others in your group various effects. For example, you might draw a card that would increase a party member's damage or reduce the damage they are taking, and much of your time as an Astrologian will be managing these cards. You can shuffle them, you can enhance their potency, and so forth. Astrologian is my preferred healer of choice, and like Dark Knight, requires Heaven's Ward content. Perhaps the job I know the least about, Machinist is a ranged physical DPS like the Bard, which largely revolves around managing ammo and gun turrets. Like the Bard, you're also able to use your secondary abilities. The Bard has a harp, the Machinist has a turret, to enhance your group or debuff enemies. Well, I guess if you like the idea of being a gunslinger, this is for you. Like Dark Knight and Astrologian, you will require access to Heaven's Ward content, and the job starts at level 30. The first of our Stormblood jobs. You will need to have bought Stormblood, however you don't need access to Stormblood content, you only need to be level 50 to unlock this class. In essence, you need to do the main quest up to level 50, which is still going to take you a while, but it's going to take you a lot less time than it will with Heaven's Ward. Well, unlike the Dragoon, Ninja, Monk and so forth, this physical melee DPS has zero utility. You won't be increasing your group's damage, you won't be enhancing your group. Instead, you'll be doing silly amounts of damage, the highest damage in the game. The Samurai is straight up damage and nothing else. No positionals, no buffs, just hitting things very hard with your katana. You will be managing two separate meters as a Samurai, but I would say the class is actually quite simple and easy and fun to play. It goes without saying, your weapon is a katana. The Red Mage is another famous and classic Final Fantasy job, combining White Mage and Black Mage. The Red Mage wields both black and white magics. That said, Red Mage is a melee DPS class, not a true hybrid. Their unique mechanic effectively involves charging up melee attacks using magic. You will balance out white and black magic. As they increase, you will then use them to make your melee attacks a lot more powerful. You will bounce from ranged to melee combat in the process. Right now, if you ask me, the Red Mage is going to outclass the Black Mage in every single way. However, this will hopefully change to make the Black Mage more desirable, but currently, Red Mage, I would argue, is the best magical DPS. Like Samurai, you'll need to own Stormblood and clear the level 50 story to obtain it. That about covers it for classes. Unlike your race, your class will determine which of the 3 starting areas you will start in, which is worth keeping in mind if you plan on playing from the start with a friend. The Marauder and Machinist start in Limsa, which is also where the Rogue is based once you reach level 10. The Pugilist, Gladiator and Thaumaturge begin in Oldar. The Archer, Lancer and Conjurer start in Gridania. Gridania? I don't even know. Once your race and class are done, you will then need to pick a few more things that don't really matter, like your character's birthday and their god of choice. You can just really pick whatever you want for this, it doesn't matter that much. Then you need to pick a world or a server to play on. At time of writing, there are currently new worlds, which will have bonuses such as increased EXP and a dowry upon reaching level 30 to encourage new players to choose them. But if you have friends on an existing world, of course go to that one. If not, or if you have friends who want to start a new character, you should definitely pick one of the new servers to take advantage of these bonuses. And unlike certain other MMOs, you can play on American servers if you're in Europe, and European servers if you're in America, and so forth. Me, I play on Ragnarok, an EU legacy server, but now you're ready to go. Following the intro cutscene, you'll be dumped into the game in either Limsa, Oldar or Gridania, depending on your starting class. If you want to play with friends, keep this in mind, as you'll either have to choose the same starting city via your classes, or play separately until you can all join up. Now, each of the starting cities has their own unique story up until around level 15, at which point they all converge and join together, and you'll be on a single path for the rest of the game. But first things first, once you get into the game, you'll just want to take things slow, and believe me, this game does start slow, and grow used to things. Now, if you're playing on PS4, I think you have to use a controller. If you're playing on PC, you can use a gamepad or mouse and keyboard. Which you want to use is entirely up to you. If you're playing on the controller, you will use a system called the cross hotbar system. In essence, you will use the shoulder buttons to modify the face buttons. So you will have like 4 abilities on, X, circle, triangle and square. If you hold L2, you will have another set of abilities, and so forth. If you're playing on the mouse and keyboard, you'll be using tab targeting 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 9 as key bindings and WASD to move. And of course you can rebind these keys as suits you. But yes, take things slow, get used to the controls, and just practice running around and using the camera and so forth. It might seem like a lot to take in at first. If you just focus on following the main scenario quest, you can't go wrong. So explore your starting city, get a feel for the place, attune to the crystals. There is absolutely no rush. Crystals are how you teleport. When you reach a new area, there will always be a large crystal or aetheryte that you touch, attuning yourself to it. Once you're attuned to it, you can teleport to it from almost anywhere in the game. Cities will also have smaller crystals, allowing you to teleport to various key points in the city. So every time you reach a new city, you should run around, find all the crystals and attune to them. And we'll have a checklist a bit later on in the video too for things you should focus on starting out. Now, once you've gotten used to the controls, you'll be thinking about quests. There are 3 main types of quest in 14. Main scenario quests, side quests, and then what I call blue quests. Main scenario quests are effectively the main story of the game. This is what you should be focused on. They look like, well, this, and they will unlock the majority of the game's content. Side quests that look like this, I'll be honest, I ignore them almost exclusively. You can do these for extra items or experience if you wish. I don't know how many players do ignore them, but they're there if you want them. But for the most part you can ignore them because they're not important. Blue quests are important side quests. They look like this, and they almost always unlock something useful to you. For example, at around level 15, there is a blue quest that will unlock your challenge log. What is a challenge log? Effectively, a weekly set of challenges that will grant you bonuses, such as complete 5 dungeons, and so forth. If you just follow the main scenario quest, you'll do fine, but now and then you will run into level blocks. For example, the next main scenario quest is level 20, but you're only level 19. This is when you want to consider other means of leveling up, such as doing side quests. Fortunately, even aside from side quests, you've got a lot of options to get more experience. First up would be leaves. Think of these as repeatable side quests. There are NPCs called leave meets or something like that. They will give you a simple task. Head out into the world, complete the task, return to the NPC, get a bunch of experience, and you can repeat these as many times as you want. For the most part. So here's where it gets a little more complicated. Leave meets are limited in that they cost an allowance. These allowances will recharge in real time. It's kind of like a mobile game. Many mobile games have like energy that regenerates over time. These are how leaves regenerate, but for the most part you can ignore them, but they're there if you want them for EXP. Aside from that, you also have fates. These are basically little quests that pop up in zones. For example, you might find one where some giant wasps are attacking an outpost, and all you need to do is head into the purple area on the map, kill X amount of wasps before the time expires to complete the fate. These can be done by everyone passing by, sometimes they even have unique rewards. Then there are dungeons and your duty roulette. What is a duty roulette? Effectively, once you progress far enough in the story to start unlocking dungeons, you will obtain the duty roulette. This is basically a daily dungeon. It will put you into a random dungeon that you have unlocked and give you a bonus for completing it. And there are even more ways to get experience, but you'll discover those as you play. For the most part, here is my advice. Focus on the main scenario quest. Do that. If you find that you can't do it because you're too low level, then start looking into side quests, fates or leaves to get yourself more experience. And if you're playing on one of these servers with bonus EXP, you probably won't need to worry about that. So there you have it. Follow the main scenario quest. Every 5 levels or so, you will unlock a new class quest unique to your class, so remember to do these as well. And at level 30, your class will get a quest to transform into a job. Around level 15 in the story, you will start to unlock dungeons. And you'll also get access to some extremely useful training missions. Look out for the Smith NPC with a green symbol above their head, which I highly suggest completing. Not only do they give you a nice set of armor and a ring that will increase your EXP gains, they'll also introduce you to some combat mechanics you'll be using. Speaking of combat, now is as good a time as any to talk about it. Combat boils down to 3 roles in Final Fantasy XIV. DPS, that is to say damage, healer, and tank. The tank's job is to keep all of the enemies attacking them, because the tanks have the most health, the most defense. They are suited to take this damage, and whilst they're doing that, they leave the DPS free to kill the boss or the enemies. The healer, meanwhile, keeps everyone alive and contributes to damage in the meantime. Content, meanwhile, boils down to 3 main forms: solo content, light party, and full party. Solo content is obviously stuff you'll be doing by yourself, or, with your chocobo companion. A light party is 4 players, 1 tank, 1 healer, 2 DPS. Full party is a group of 8. There is also a few larger groups that you might get into later on, but these are very infrequent. These are alliances, where it's essentially 3 full parties all tackling very big content. The combat in Final Fantasy XIV is very simple though. It's less reactive than, say, Dark Souls. You won't have to focus that much on dodging every single attack. The combat is more about learning your assigned role. You'll eventually have many abilities, but the game does a good job at doling them out slowly to you, and they often have synergy with each other. For example, one ability will combo with another ability, meaning you use ability 1 and then ability 2 is powered up, so you use ability 1 then ability 2. For the most part it's very self-explanatory if you look at the abilities and read them, and there is a novice system in game where people will help you. Failing that, you can always just ask someone or look at in-depth guides online. So effectively the combat comes down to maintaining your character's rotation, as in ability 1, ability 2, knowing when to use certain abilities. During combat, you also need to keep an eye on enmity, also known as aggro or hate. This is how the game determines who is being hit. Tanks often have abilities that increase their enmity, so it's rarely something you'll have to worry about as a healer or DPS if your tank is doing their job, but definitely something to keep in mind. But yes, tanks want high enmity, everyone else wants low enmity in the majority of cases. Aside from this, the other major part of combat is simply avoiding AoE attacks. This is, well, self-explanatory. Due to your character's echo ability, you will be able to see when enemies are charging up area of effect attacks. In essence, you will see big orange marks on the floor. Don't stand in them. They will start simple and gradually become more and more intense as the game goes on. Many bosses in the game will also have unique mechanics to them, but there are some that are universal, and even if you're not going to be seeing some until later, I think it's a very good idea to keep them in mind because, as I say, they are universal and you will see them a lot, so it's good to know what to do when they pop up. So let's cover some of them. Stack arrows. This probably isn't the official name for it, but when you see this, it means that the group needs to stack on top of each other to gather up. In essence, you're going to see someone with these arrows pointing at them. Go and stand on top of them, because the damage will be divided amongst all of those hit. It can also be a good time to use defensive cooldowns. If you're anticipating the damage to be too high for you to survive, pop a cooldown. Spread circles. Another very basic concept, the enemy will mark several party members who then have circles around them. Effectively, you want to spread out so the circles don't overlap. As you can see from this great example, these circles are overlapping and that guy took a lot more damage than he needed to. This is a mechanic used all the damn time, and it's useful to have an idea in mind where you'll run to. Typically you'll spread out to the sides of the arena. Remember that you can use sprint in combat to speed it up, if you want to move away from another player faster. If you really want to be thorough, you can assign your group positions to run. For example, that player will run to the top, this player will run to the bottom, and so forth. This will prevent anyone from getting confused and overlapping. But usually you don't need to do that, just spread out, it's great. Gaze. Signified by a large red and black eye above the enemy, this gaze mechanic is something you will definitely have to be on the lookout for as DPS. Sometimes, if your camera is quite zoomed in, you won't see it as it will be above the enemy or the boss. This mechanic is extremely simple though. Your player character must be turned away from the boss. Best way to avoid it? Just turn your character away from the boss. Your camera can still be facing them, however. I believe 90 degrees is usually enough, but in 99% of cases, you are free to do a full 180, and it's worth pointing out that you can attack bosses whilst you're not looking at them a lot of the time. I'm not really sure why, but there you have it. Cleave. Not all AoE attacks have markers on the ground. Cleaves sometimes fall into this category. Basically, the boss will attack in a cone in front of them for high damage. Solution: don't stand in front of the boss if you're a healer or DPS. Very simple. However, there will be instances where you will need to eat cleaves. For example, if the damage is going to be split amongst everyone it hits, you will want everyone to absorb the cleave. So there are times where the tank might turn the boss around and have his attack hit everyone. Don't worry if they do that, it's intentional. For the most part though, if you're not tanking, never go in front of the boss. Pillars. Simply put, pillars will spawn during the fight. One player needs to stand on each of them to absorb the damage they will otherwise inflict upon the group. Stretchy bar. What an inventive name! But this is a mechanic that will see an orange marker on the ground, a line tethering you to the enemy. The line will grow and expand as you move closer or further away from the enemy. In most cases, you will want to move closer to the boss to make the line as small as possible. However, there will be instances where you will need to move further away or have somebody else stand in the line in front of you, but usually this will involve standing as close to the boss as possible, as the damage will increase the further you go from the enemy. Or, what's even worse, everyone standing in the line will take damage, which is why you want to make the line as small as possible. There are other mechanics in the game, a lot of them, but these are some that you'll come across time and time again. Best course of action though, if you don't know an encounter, if you're new to a dungeon, let your party know. Most people are fine with explaining what to do with newcomers, so let them know, hey, I'm new to this fight, can you tell me what to do? Or can you tell me the important mechanics to look out for? But if that doesn't suit your fancy, you can always look it up online. You will almost always know what dungeon you're doing beforehand, because your quest will say, enter the Dungeon of Eternal Agony, and then you can look it up, you can look for a guide. What are the bosses in the Dungeon of Eternal Agony? What do I need to do? But this is an MMO. It's part of the experience to communicate and learn with other players, to tell them tactics, what to do, what not to do, and so forth. If someone refuses to do this, they are the ones playing the game wrong, not you. So do not be afraid to ask if you don't know what to do, okay? Finally, whilst not a mechanic per se, AoE pools are very common in dungeons at this point in time, something you should be prepared to understand. The normal way to go through a dungeon is one group of enemies at a time, perhaps using crowd control, single target damage and so forth, but often you will find groups and tanks who want to pull many groups of enemies at once. If you see a tank doing this, be prepared to heal them a lot if you're a healer. If you're a DPS, get ready to use your AoE abilities. Most classes have these, and it'll be something like deals an attack to all nearby enemies. Basically, you'll want to spam that over and over to damage all of the enemies at once. But remember, it's only really worth doing if there are 4 or more enemies, and this will drain your TP very quickly. And because we didn't really cover that, TP is the resource that determines your physical attacks, MP determines your magic attacks. You could think of it as a stamina bar. In the past, using sprint used to drain the entire TP bar. Thankfully that's no longer the case, lucky us. Finally, you might have noticed in the top left, limit breaks. These will fill up gradually as you do group content. Melee DPS do a large, single target damage limit break. Range DPS will do a line of damage, and magic DPS will do a huge AoE damage. Tank's limit break is a large defensive ability that hits everyone in the group, and healer's limit break is a big heal. Now, the important things to note here are like when and where you should use these. If you are fighting a single target boss, you will generally want to do a melee limit break. If you are fighting many enemies, you will want either a caster limit break or a ranged DPS limit break. There are times where the boss will do a really big attack and you will want a tank limit break. And there are times where you will want to save it for a healer's limit break. Because, here's the nice thing, the limit break level 3, when 3 bars are filled up, the healer's one, it will revive and fully heal everyone in the group. So that's really damn useful. For the most part, just keep an eye on what's going on and be reactive. In, I would say, 70% of content, you will want to be using a melee limit break, just to do a big chunk of damage to the boss. Now, here's a useful tip that not many people seem to know. If you are a caster and you're in a dungeon and you have a limit break around the first or second boss, do not be afraid to use that on trash enemies, because the meter will build up again, and using it to kill a bunch of enemies will do you a lot more good than just having it and not using it. But for the most part, just read what the group says. Often the tank will say, save limit break, use limit break, and so forth. But again, it's not something you really need to worry about, because you can only use limit breaks in group content. And for the most part, there's going to be a lot of other people who will know what to do, so watch what they do, unless they do something really stupid. But yes, if you have more questions about limit breaks or anything else, do ask. Now let us summarise this 20,000 minute long video with a checklist. Keep in mind you don't have to follow us, but it's just what I would do, personally. Make character, choose world, attune to the crystals in your starting city, focus on main scenario quests and blue quests. Remember to do class quests every 5 levels or so. At level 15, grab the challenge log in Limsa Lominsa. Also, it might be worth bookmarking this link, which is also in the description. It has a very handy list of things as they are unlocked by levels. For example, it will say, this dungeon is unlocked at level 20, you can get this pet or this emote or this blue quest at level 30, and so forth. But that's about it. Focus on the main scenario quest, as that unlocks the majority of other content. If you ever find yourself sorely lacking in levels, consider looking up Leaves, Palace of the Dead, using the duty roulette. As a matter of fact, you should be doing the duty roulette at least once a day, for the huge amounts of bonus EXP it gives you. I hope this guide was useful, and of course if you have any questions not covered here, feel free to ask down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.